Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience as we sorted a bit of some technical issues on our part. Thank you very much for your patience. My name is Hannington Amol, representing the East African Law Society. And I welcome you to this session, which is basically
Yes, we had some 21.
Which is tackling the changing face of transnational crime, especially in the 21st century. And for those of you who have been with us through, Lillian, there's an interference at the back. Thank you. For those of you who've been with us through the series, as we tackled, you could have realized that this was a progression. We started with laying the foundation on the work of cyber or cyber development and the role of technology generally in the development of the law and criminal processes. And later on, we tackled digital forensic, the intricate role of cyber in investigation, prosecution, and defense of crimes. Now we have gone to the main subject, which are the crimes. And I know a number of you are either involved as prosecutors, defense attorneys, attorneys watching briefs in matters that at some particular point involve use of technology, especially in areas of economic crimes. And by nature, transnational crimes tend to be more of economic crimes. Obviously, not all of them. Have in mind things like drug trafficking, weapon trafficking, cyber phishing, and basically what I would call cyber robbery of banks and financial institutions. You notice most of them have economic aspects. Obviously, not all transnational crimes will have these aspects. And with us in the room are experts who are going to help us unpack them. We have with us John Bridge, who is an accomplished expert in the area of cyber law and technology, and currently working as Director of Financial Technologies at Trust Stamp. He brings in a wealth of experience, and at the appropriate time, he's going to share with you quite a lot on this particular subject. We have Mr. Stephen Kiptines, who is, I would call him in East Africa, the guru of intellectual property and now law and technology. He's been with us previously, and he's also going to help us, especially give the local context to transnational crimes. And especially given his background on law and technology, he's basically going to be able to relate the two and share with us the role of technology generally in prosecuting, investigating, or even defending transnational crimes. And just shortly, I'll be inviting Marcus Green, who is the Assistant General Counsel of FISA, but we all know him as the board member of AGA Africa, our greatest partner. And since 2017, he's been at the forefront of ensuring that lawyers in East Africa are retooled, especially to give focus to law and technology, and to help us understand the link between our role and what the rest of the world goes through. The very first training that East African Law Society did on transnational crime in Kigali in 2017 was facilitated under the command of Marcus Green in Kigali, Rwanda. And since then, we've been collaborating in holding more and more of these trainings. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite Marcus to address us officially open. We are going to interact. We have about 1 hour, 40 minutes of interactive session. We'll be hearing from the speakers at the right time. But first, let's hear from Marcus. Marcus, welcome. Marcus, you are still on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Thank you. Thank you.
It's good to be with all of you, even though it's virtual, and it's good to see my brethren who are participating in the COVID look and sporting the beard. I think my buddy Mr. Bridge gets the prize in terms of the length, thickness, and quality of the beard. But we will continue to work at it. It is a good morning this morning and an afternoon to all of you. We are, as you all know, living in the middle of a major pandemic that has gripped the entire world. But we're here and we're continuing to fight, we're continuing to survive and thrive. And so this particular partnership between AGA Africa and the East Africa Law Society is coveted by us. We've done amazing work together, and I want us to continue to do work. This webinar on the changing face of transnational crimes in the 21st century is no exception. The pandemic highlights the importance of us staying connected and the importance of us working on these really, really important issues, right? All of our businesses are now being conducted online, from banking to work that law enforcement is doing, all businesses. And so in many respects, it's a treasure trove for criminal activity. It's an opportunity for folks to steal identities, to steal accounts, to hack into systems. And so we need to batten down the hatches, we need to be vigilant, and we need to continue to focus on making sure that we have the tools that we need to combat transnational crimes. Because all of this, they're doubling down on cyber, right? I mean, just the way we're doubling down on cyber, we're doubling down on technology, so are the criminals. And so we need to make sure that we are vigilant, we are connected, and we are focused, and that we understand the latest technology, and more importantly, we know how to use it. I mean, so many of us of the older vintage, we kind of shy away sometimes from technology, but COVID has forced us to pay attention, has forced us to ask our 12-year-old how to get into whatever social media account that we're trying to get into, has forced us to engage webinars and engage Zooms and the like in order to conduct our work. It's no longer a nice thing to do, it's a requirement. And so AGA Africa has fully embraced that, and the East Africa Law Society clearly has fully embraced that. So I really want to thank Mr. Willie Rubia, the president of EALS, again, Mr. Hannington Amal, Chief Executive Officer, for your continued partnership in all of this. The beautiful thing about AGA and the East Africa Law Society is you know who we are and we know who you are. And so, as you know, we're in 8 different countries. We are bringing facilitators into those local markets and trying to help the conversation along. And I say conversation because I don't like to say lectures. I like to say conversation, because it's a real shared experience. There's an opportunity for all of us to exchange best practices, to learn from each other, all with the same goal in mind. That is to combat transnational crimes. How do we impact, cyber crimes that are taking place? How do we make sure that we have court systems that are using the latest technology in order to continue to carry out justice? How do we make sure that we are delivering justice to the victims in the midst of this pandemic? That's what we're doing, and we're working together, and I want this partnership to continue, and I suspect that it will continue. So I don't want to belabor the point. I know we have a lot of work to be done. I want to thank again the facilitators, Mr. Stephen Kipnis, as well as John Bridge, for their volunteering and participating in this webinar. And I look forward to hearing about the questions that come out of this and the learnings. This is a real opportunity to add to your toolbox. I think every investigator, every lawyer that engages in this work, I think they should think of their skill set as a toolbox. And every webinar, every seminar, every conference, there should be an opportunity to add something to that toolbox. And you may not need it right away, but it's in there, so you know it's there, and it's awareness, and it's connectivity to individuals. People are resources, right? So if you have a question on something, you have John Bridges' email, you shoot him a text, you shoot him an email, and you'll get an answer. And that's the beauty of us being connected. You know, organized crime should not be the only sector of the criminal justice system that is organized. Law enforcement must be organized and connected, and we're helping to do that. So with that, I want to thank you again to the East African Law Society for their continued support and their partnership, and we look forward to more programs like this to come. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Marcus, and thank you for that powerful opener. I think you've set the tone for the discussion we are going to have this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be inviting our very first speaker and facilitator, Stephen Kipkines. And even as I do this, I urge you to make use of technology. There's a chat button. There's a place where you can put in your comments, questions, and you can be sure myself and my co-moderator, David Sigano, will be looking attentively at them, and will be ensuring that we bring them to the attention of the facilitators, and every concern you raise regarding the topic of the day should be able to attend to it. Steve, please, may I welcome you now?
Thank you very much, Hannington. Good to see you again. Good to see Marcus Green looking as dapper as ever. And yes, I agree. Mr. Bridges' beard is what my beard wants to be when it grows up. But it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to speak to my colleagues on transnational crime, organized crime. The words transnational and organized crime are used interchangeably or both at the same time. In fact, the typical acronym is TAC. Transnational, TOC rather, transnational organized crime. As I often do during my presentations, I will start with a very small snippet of of how the web works. Let me just try to minimize my screen here so that I can get that out of the way. Thank you very much. So how, 3.5 minutes of a background understanding into how the World Wide Web works. So the internet is often used interchangeably as a word with the web. Really what the internet is a series of networks. It's a network of networks. It allows you to connect to the material, the data, the content which is on the web. And this starts really with your little mobile device. It's as basic as your mobile device. It's a router, it's a switch, it's a series of fiber optic cables. It's the networks that allow you to get to the web. And the web obviously is where then you have the content that is stored, and the content is available on certain root servers. Root servers make that give you that ability to get to the content that you want to look at. What you typically do is to click on a link, which then directs your web browser to a certain website, the website that you seek to view. And so it'll download that website, it'll display it on your computer, on your device, and bingo, there you are. Now, as you click on from one web page to another, and I've given an example on the left part of my screen of the NewYorkTimes.com, and you can see the different definitions, if you like, of what a web link contains. But as you click on, assuming you open the worldwideweb.newyorktimes.com, if you click on that, it gives you, obviously the home page. If you click on anything on technology, or if you want to read on law, you want to read on transnational crime, a story on transnational organized crime, it'll take you to that relevant web page within the website of NewYorkTimes.com. So all these interchangeable web pages, all these links to web pages are essentially linkages or web pages that point to one another, and hence the name a web, just like a spider's web. They are all interlinked and allow you to connect from one to another without having to retype the web page that you want to get into. You could find yourself starting on the NewYorkTimes.com and end up at a legal journal. You could find yourself ending up on YouTube. You could find yourself ending up on pretty much anything that's available on the web. So this really is the ease with which you can navigate the World Wide Web. Now, a web search engine comprises of two things: a search robot running in the background, which analyzes and indexes web pages. So this robot just collects material information relating to new web pages and try and indexes them so that when you want to go to that page, you can interlink and easily get to it. And I'll show you how simple that is. It also has a search interface, and this is your search engine, like Google, where you pose a question. And the next slide is simply an explanation of that. So if you go onto Google and you have, very many other different types of search engines, but Google is the most popular, followed by YouTube, which is the second most popular web search engine. The relationship between the web pages and the search engines is like that of a library. Now, you and I in our daily workings make use of a library, which could be virtual, but starting from the traditional perspective of a library, which is a building with books, and it could be a building in a room full of books, or it could be multi-layers of floors having books. But if you go to a new library for the first time, then what you typically would do is to either go speak to the librarian, or look for the catalogs, which could be a computer at a certain corner of the library, or hard copy catalogs to allow you to identify where are the books on transnational crime that I'm trying to read on. So how those books get there in the first place and how material gets on the web is through this search robot that I refer to, playing the role of a librarian who's seeking to acquire books. So there's this library which seeks to acquire a new write-up on transnational crime. And so the librarian who's working the acquisitions makes an order for the book. This is how the search robot trolls over the web, looking for new web pages, looking for new material that's on the World Wide Web. So the database is basically the catalog system, the database on the web. And therefore, the web browser is like a librarian working in the reference desk. So once the material has been identified by the search robot, once the acquisitions librarian has obtained the book, that book has to be referenced and placed in the right place. In a similar way, the web browser plays that role of placing that web page in an accessible place, or making it available in an accessible way for you. And so it is entered into a catalog, and just like in the library you have a catalog card, well, your catalog card is basically your search engine. So you go into your search engine and you type out books on transnational crime, and it'll give you a list of books or a list of sites who would sell those books to you or make those books available to you. So really how the World Wide Web works can be placed as against how a library works. So it's not too complicated. Now, technology crime. I start with the word technology crime because what we're trying to understand today is how the interplay of technology and how that has made the commission of transnational organized crime way easier, way more efficient in a way that it wasn't before sort of technology became mainstream. So technology crime are crimes that are committed using computer networks or other forms of ICTs. And the very sort of preeminent characteristic that ICTs have given is the ability to access, is the ability to operate anonymously, and therefore the definition therefore of transnational crime is very well effected through the use of technology, because you can access material, you can access victims of your crime if you are a perpetrator who are in jurisdictions well across from where you might be domiciled or situated. Transnational crime speaks to the crimes that are planned, executed, or have an impact out and beyond one country. So it traverses several countries, sometimes at the same time. It includes, your traditional offenses like trafficking of drugs, arms, which used to happen in a traditional fashion, trafficking of wildlife, trophies, wildlife parts, things like ivory, trafficking of humans, money laundering, extortion, terrorism, data theft. It includes pretty much most aspects of traditional crime which are executed across different jurisdictions with the use of technology. So technology has become a very huge enabler for transnational criminals. Increased internet connectivity, access to technology, the use of technology has made that the commissions of transnational crime extremely easy. So the transnational crime using technology takes advantage of, in certain countries, non-existent or inadequate cybercrime legislation. When you look at transnational crime, not only do you look at the sort of traditional statute books, which in this case, in Kenya, for example, you might be speaking about the penal code, but you will have a lot of states who have now enacted statutes speaking specifically to cybercrime or computer crime, as it's known in some countries. And therefore, if you don't have adequate cybercrime legislation, a nation or a country or a government would be unable to effectively prosecute crimes which were traditional under the statute books, but have used technology to make them more efficient. If you attempted to prosecute a criminal who has been apprehended under the traditional methods of under the traditional offenses, then you might not get the joy that you need in order to ensure the punishment that is necessary is given out by the courts in a proper conviction. And so cybercrime legislation is essential in order to be creating the ability for a prosecutor to have a wealth of statutes which can be cross-referenced and used to prosecute such crime. The web, or if you like, the internet, really doesn't have any jurisdiction. I sit in my office, I sit in my home, and I'm able to do things across boundaries. Similarly, criminals can commit offenses across different boundaries. And so the very key characteristic of the internet that allows transnational crimes to use technology efficiently is the lack of a jurisdiction. And the importance of jurisdiction is that nations can, within their geographic boundaries, prosecute any crimes, apprehend any criminals easily. But how do you then start to apprehend a criminal living in a state which is far removed from where the crime happened? The crime, in fact, can take place over multiple jurisdictions. So the question would be asked, what jurisdiction would have mandate to prosecute that criminal? And can they be prosecuted in several different states and punished in several different states? So poor cooperation between states speaks to the natural corollary of the aspect of a jurisdictionless internet. There must be, of necessity, cooperation between states, cooperation between governments, between enforcement agencies, between prosecutors. That way, it makes investigation somewhat easier, not necessarily easy, but somewhat easier in seeking to track down criminals, perpetrators of transnational organized crime. You will also be aware that criminals participating in transnational organized crime cooperate quite a bit. It's a network, it's an enterprise, it's a very profitable criminal enterprise, which speaks to the nature of cooperation between these criminals. Sometimes criminals in different different specialties, just like we have specialties in the legal profession. So you have criminals who are good in one thing and not good in another. And so they will seek to, my apologies, they will seek to collaborate with those who might be the source criminals. I mean, if you're a criminal who trades in data, but you do not have the expertise to acquire the data, there would be a criminal who can acquire that data for you, hand it over to you, sell it over to you for a price, and then you can then unpackage that data, use it for purposes of mischievously hiding your identity and committing additional crimes, or hacking into individuals' bank accounts, identity theft, etc. So cooperation between states has to be as good, if not better, than the cooperation between criminals in transnational organized crime. Cyber-dependent crimes are what I'm calling crimes that can be committed using computers, ICTs, and networks. And these then involve certain peculiar cyber crimes, which are over and beyond the traditional transnational crimes: spread of malware, denial of service, tampering with data, password sniffing, etc. Cyber-facilitated crimes, on the other hand, are those that can be conducted offline. However, the internet has increased the scale, geographic scope, and the speed. And this would then speak to your traditional transnational organized crimes, which then can be committed. I mean, you can commit the offense of murder in a transnational fashion by having a network of criminals who take out people, for whatever reason. Active crimes place a reliance on the active direct participation by the victim. This happens in cases where you have a criminal enterprise that seeks to steal the identity of certain specific people, or chance upon an individual being careless, responding to a phishing email, for example, where then you disclose your security passwords, your security codes that would allow you to access a certain restricted website or your bank accounts to criminals. A passive crime is the kind of crime that involves a system lapse, which allows a criminal to operate covertly. And a lot of this would be with criminals who are seeking to steal data, to make use of data. And in this day and age, data has become perhaps more valuable than any other form of criminal enterprise, if you think about cybercrime. So technology has increased the level of risk for institutions and individuals. I mean, we demand technology to make our lives easier, to make our ability to work easier, to make my ability to get entertained easier. Previously, you'd have to go to a casino to gamble, but I can gamble online. I can be a member of multiple casinos online. But by doing so, I'm opening myself up to the risk of my personal data being hacked, my financials, my digital currencies being hacked by criminals. So the fact that we've demanded technology as, if you like, upright citizens, while criminals have realized that technology increases the level of reward and it takes you away from the scene of crime. There's nothing better than being able to commit a crime and you're away from the scene of crime. In fact, away from the jurisdiction where the crime is being committed. The nature of the internet is fragmented, it's layered, it has no centralized government, and this speaks to what I mentioned in terms of jurisdiction. It catalyzes deviant and criminal activity. It just makes criminal activity that much more exciting to get involved in. The use of apps, avatars, transient devices, the deep web, the dark web, have just made it that much easier. Layers of security have made detection by search engines of websites difficult, and this is going on to my next point, which is really about the surface web, the dark web, the deep web. So you have the surface web, and this is what most people who are on the web will utilize on a day-to-day. I'm pretty sure none of you might go through your day with access to the web without going to a search engine like Google. And so when you go to the search engine, that search engine is on the surface web. It is indexed, but it constitutes approximately 10% of the total capacity of the World Wide Web. And I'll show you then in the next slide how that looks, in the representation using an iceberg. So the surface web is where, all search engines, all web pages, websites that are available are indexed. This goes back to the point I made about your robot, which catalyzes all new web pages and creates a catalog of them. The deep web, on the other hand, is not indexed up to a point. Some of the deep web websites are indexed, but most of them are not indexed. These are websites that are accessible through usernames, through password, through security codes. It involves company internal networks. It involves private databases. So you can only ideally access web pages which are on the deep web through the use of security codes, security passwords. This is, again, like your banking. This is like a company internal database which allows you to work. In our firm, we have a similar database that allows us to look at all our files, all our dealings in the office in a secure database, but it's web-based. Now, if you look on the left side of your screen, you'll see the picture of an iceberg, and the top part of that iceberg represents the 10%, the part that's above the water. It represents the approximately 10% of the potential capacity of the World Wide Web. And that's what you call the surface web with the indexed web pages. The next portion is the deep web, and this represents mostly unindexed websites. And the deep web is where you have websites that are accessible using security passwords. You then have the dark web, which is a subset of the deep web, which has a lot of hidden services. You don't traditionally access the dark web like you would the surface web or the deep web. To access the dark web, you need to make use of what are known as random encrypted relays. This is a series of relays where your internet traffic is redirected using random encryption, so that it's almost like if you're walking in mud, if you're walking in undisturbed mud or in the snow, you take a step in the snow, and as soon as you lift your foot, you can see a footprint. So the equivalent of the random encrypted relays is sort of trying to erase your footprint so that You are in the snow, but nobody coming after you can tell you were there. So it seeks to protect the fact of your existence on the dark web. Unfortunately, the dark web is used primarily by criminals. It is also used by intelligence agencies or people who have an interest in trying to track down the criminals who operate on the dark web. So there's anonymity, there's incognito payments, cryptocurrencies. There's a lot of trade that happens on the deep web, on the dark web as well. What are some of the realities of transnational crime? Well, detection of crimes is just that much harder. Some of the responses that certain security agencies or even institutions are trying to use to ensure that they do not fall victim to cyber criminals is to use analytics, try and predict how your customers or your subscribers or the people who have legal permission to be on your website, to be on your server space, behave, so that if you have any anomalies in that behavior, you can sort of determine that perhaps a criminal is trying to hack in, perhaps something is happening. You also have the use of machines to allow utility or to allow dealings with if you're an institution, dealings with your subscribers or your individuals who are subscribed to your service. But there's a way that your machines can be trained to deal with them so that you don't have a human interface at the back end. The machines can also be taught to identify where there's certain suspicious or non-typical activity in order to flag certain transactions. And this particularly could be in the case of banks and money laundering. You have the use of cloud computing technologies and artificial intelligence to just try and mitigate, protect yourself against cybercrime if you're an institution, which speaks to cybersecurity being absolutely crucial. There is no individual or institution, and I'll repeat that, individual or institution who can afford to be blasé about their cybersecurity. Anytime you get onto the web, you are opening yourself up to a potential breach, a potential victim of a cyber criminal. There's a risk that your data could be breached. There's a risk that your identity could be stolen, and so you ought to keep it front and center in your mind that the way I operate, the websites I go to, the things that I do online are backed by a level of some sort of cybersecurity. Now, I've already mentioned that transnational crimes is really transnational. It goes across different nations. There's collaboration between criminals in the underground. There's use of digital technologies like blockchain by criminals. Criminals, like I said, have found a lot of value in using technology to their advantage. It has led to the monetization of crimes. Data is monetized as it is. The value of data is such that if you are a criminal doing nothing else but trying to breach into places where there is valuable data, that in itself allows you not to do much but obtain data, get onto the sort of wholesale market and distribute that data for a price. It is also possible to use that data to attempt to blackmail institutions. Several institutions across the globe have been blackmailed where they're asked to make payments by cryptocurrencies, bitcoins, for example, in order for them to be given access. It could be a DDoS, distributed denial of service. It could be that someone hacked into your server and has denied you access. Technology is used efficiently to commit criminal enterprise, and some of those examples include the use of cellular or satellite networks, the use of numerous antennae in communications, use of repeater stations, this is in the telco space, use of equipment hidden in remote locations, burner phones, auto submarines, and as far as auto submarines is concerned, I find this interesting, particularly in terms with drug traffickers. There are certain very innovative drug traffickers in South America, and I believe between Mexico and the US as well, who have attempted to use remote controlled submarines that are filled to the brim with drug packages. They operate beneath the ocean or beneath the water body that borders that is shared between Mexico and the US. And so the police, the enforcement agencies have to think through how do we start targeting submarines which operate remotely. And I've seen a few documentaries about how this works, and it's extremely interesting because it's a form of technology that allows the risk is reduced for the criminal to be apprehended, So, the enforcement agencies might find packets of heroin trying to cross into the US, but they might not find the individuals, and that shows you the nature of reduction of risk for the apprehension of criminals. So apprehending the drugs themselves is not equivalent to apprehending the criminals. Using use of burner phones. Burner phones simply speaks to one-time use, where you use a phone. You buy a SIM card, use a phone, make a certain communication with a certain individual who's expecting it, and as soon as that happens, the phone is trashed. So if there was any security agency listening in onto it and trying to track the phone, it'll lead them to a dead end. You've watched movies of the attempted apprehension of Osama bin Laden, and how certain equipment hidden in remote locations, especially satellite phones, are used. Let me make faster progress, and I see I'm running out of time. So the use of smartphones, emails, dead drops, social media platforms, apps, the stuff that you and I use on a daily basis, the stuff that we employ to communicate, to do what we do for as law-abiding citizens. But that's exactly what criminals will use. They will be part of the social media platforms you and I are a part of. They will undertake communications in terms of arranging, conspiring to commit crimes using the very same platforms you and I use. In a certain case in 2008 in the UK, 4 individuals were arrested for using an escort agent's website on the web as a front for trafficking, specifically Thai women. Again, the use of an otherwise legitimate business website for something illegitimate. Drones are now being used to transport drugs over long distances. I mean, why get in a chopper? Why use couriers to individuals who can carry the drugs themselves, say from deep in the Colombian forest? You want to cross a border, there's risks of meeting border enforcement agency individuals, enforcement officers. So drones are now being used, and get your drone loaded with drugs, transport it across long distances. Drones can carry heavier loads. They can evade check and entry points. They can cross the borders without having to submit to a border check like you would have to. In the Czech Republic, 2 individuals were arrested for using a website and an app to advertise underage girls for prostitution. It's not illegal to have a website, but if you have a website to commit crimes, like these 2 individuals in the Czech Republic, then you are committing a crime and you can be arrested. So the web has provided for ease of access to drug recipes. I mean, nowadays you don't need to take too much time trying to figure out how to make certain drugs. On the web, you'll find pretty much everything telling you how to do that, which means you can use the web to create a drug and become a drug dealer in your local neighborhood. Drug lords are using stored value cards to move large sums of money. I mean, if you find an individual with stored value cards, you might not really know or understand what that might be unless you find him with a huge chunk of it. But it's an innovative way of transferring value, of transferring currencies. You can actually use digital currency accounts, which remain on the web. You can use transfer of funds using the internet, opening accounts with low cost and little known gateways to try and evade security agencies that are eavesdropping or investigating you if you're a prime suspect. Setting up online shops with payment gateways, so purporting to set up legitimate online shops, but you do have in fact certain secret payment gateways which are used to transfer drug money or money launder. Use of bank accounts of mules. So mules are regular people who are used to commit crimes. A typical mule would be asked to ferry a package, board a plane from point A to point B, hand that package to a person at point B, and he'll be paid. And it could happen that the mule would be told, we'll use your bank account, we'll deposit 10 million into your bank account, 10 million shillings, and you will send out 9 million shillings to a certain individual. So you have to deal with answering the questions to the bank. And if anything goes wrong, then you're the one that gets arrested. Trade in personal data. That I cannot say how much personal data is of value today, but trade in personal data is increasing as a transnational crime. Collaboration between financial agencies, therefore, investigation agencies, enforcement and prosecution agencies is absolutely crucial. Now, this page just seems to speak to some of the key statutes in Kenya, but this is not exhaustive. A lot of these statutes are mirrored in different other jurisdictions, so I won't spend time on this. But who are the facilitators of transnational organized crime? And these are individuals and or entities who facilitate the commission of organized crime knowingly or unknowingly. Some of the prime facilitators are advocates, attorneys, because what we do, we create shell companies, we create offshore companies. I mean, you will remember, you know, when WikiLeaks broke and there was this whole treasure trove of information worth loads and loads of terabytes of people, individuals, lawyers as well in different countries setting up companies. I mean, there was a certain lady who was a deputy chief justice in this country, and it was reported that, you know, her and her husband had set up certain shell companies in Panama, I believe it was, which are then used to transact certain accounts or certain monies or assist in the commission of certain crimes. So we as advocates, as attorneys, are very crucial as facilitators. It cannot happen without the use of attorneys. And sometimes you will do it knowingly or unknowingly. I mean, I, for one, regularly open offshore bank accounts in different offshore jurisdictions because clients want to make certain tax decisions that will reduce their tax burden. So perhaps they're not trying to evade tax, but they're trying to avoid tax, which is actually not an offense. But you always will have to find yourself asking the question, am I doing something that's legitimate? One of the crucial things in our anti-money laundering statute in Kenya is that it does not require advocates to be reporters of the movement of money, of anti-money laundering transactions, as it is in many other countries. And I think that's a certain weakness of that statute. Bankers as well, forex bureau owners, telecom companies, accountants, PE funds. There's certain individuals who have this money have monies that need to be laundered and legitimized, and it is entirely possible that they would find certain compromised venture capitalists or private equity funders who would take that money and seek to invest that money in legitimate businesses. Developers and real estate agents. A lot of people who have money to spend want to invest in capital projects because those can consume a lot of that kind of money. Casino owners. This is a very good place for people with that kind of money to launder, to spend, because casinos are known as, you know, huge churners of income. Matatu owners in Kenya and in East Africa, matatus, you know what matatus are. This is a public transport. It's a transport business where cash is king in terms of the payments, in terms of repairs, in terms of you know, how everything happens around it. So it's a good place to launder money. Public officers especially in the developing world, are a huge channel of facilitators, particularly through tenders and things like that. The legislature, through making laws that will allow drug dealers or people who have money to launder to remain legitimate. The executive, people with this kind of money will want to sponsor certain political parties and get those people to come into the leadership of the country. And so you can find a compromised chief executive of the country, i.e. president, prime minister, because, you know, they got campaign funds from people who had something to hide. The judiciary, I mean, our country, Kenya, has suffered quite a huge hit in terms of drug dealers compromising certain aspects, certain officers in the judiciary to make sure they never get sentenced, their cases take forever, or even in certain cases never get charged, or get charged but get acquitted. The impact of such on developing countries is extremely high. It results in a lot of corruption, weak institutions, a weak economy, loss of strategic competitiveness. You can't position your country and, you know, tell investors that, you know, we're ready, open to do business if you are known as a conduit, you know, for transnational crime. It results in social injustice because then the government, the public sector will not focus on enhancing value for the members of the public, which means it could lead to insecurity. So you do have the United Nations Convention Against Transnational and Organized Crime, which is sort of, you know, the one centralized convention that, you know, spells out how transnational organized crime ought to be dealt with by different countries, member states of the United Nations. You also have the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, which has a digest of organized crime cases, which I find very useful in terms of breaking down transnational organized crime. My time is up, so let me not go through the last two slides. I believe you should be able to get a copy of this slide at the tail end of this seminar webinar today. But please read about the Silk Road case, perfect case that happened on a platform on the deep web, which represented the perfect way to commit crimes transnationally, to have organized crime, collaboration between different individuals. This went across different states, different nation states across the world, different states in the US, etc. I will stop my presentation there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. That was a very enlightening presentation. I did not personally know how deep the deep web is. I think I now have quite a lot of information on that. I will move on to the next presenter. We will have the questions after this session. So I can see John Bridges' screen is loading. I would like to give a very brief introduction of John Bridges. He's currently the director of Financial Crimes Technology at Financial Crimes Technology and Trust Stamp. This is a biometric and artificial intelligence company. He's previously worked as a senior inspector with the United States Marshal Service as at the Investigative Operations Unit. He was a founding member of a specialized unit within the Marshal Service that conducted investigations with the finance industry and e-commerce platforms. He's also served in the United States Marines as a military policeman. Those who are aware of the military know what military police is. So Mr. Bridges has previously served there. He's been a member of the International Association of Financial Crimes and Investigators, I think more than 15 years. So Mr. Bridges, I think you have a lot of experience in this area. We welcome you to share with us on this platform your presentation for today. I ask members who are present to reserve your questions. You can share them through our questions platform. Our presenters will be able to look at them immediately after Mr. Bridges' presentation. So welcome, Mr. Bridges.
Thank you, sir. And I would like to thank Stephen as well. I think that was a great presentation, and the Ross Ulbricht case is a great case. So I want to reiterate that that's the case study at the end of Mr. Kipnis' slides is definitely worth looking up. So I will skip this slide. That's a little bit about me. So the objectives of this training will be to identify primary transnational crimes that affect Eastern Africa, identify the role of cryptocurrency in dark web and transnational crimes, identify some key Interpol findings related to Africa specifically, and challenges to combating transnational crimes, and then discussion of potential solutions. So the, as Marcus said at the beginning, this is a conversation. My familiarity with transnational crimes specific to Africa is only based on reading, but transnational crimes by their nature affect everybody. So a lot of the things that affect Africa affect the United States and affect other parts of the world. And so it's going to be an interesting examination of this topic. One of the things that Stephen talked about was the difference between cyber-dependent crimes and cyber-facilitated crimes. So when I'm looking at the transnational crimes that affect Eastern Africa, I'm going to be looking at it from both perspectives. I know this is a cyber training, but I think in looking at transnational crimes and ways to interdict, we have to look at all of the crimes and kind of focus on where do we cause the disruption, where do we cause the prevention, and where do we create protection. So those are kind of the ways that are associated with disrupting. So the main crimes from an Interpol Afripol report indicated that these are some of the areas. There were several more, but I'm going to focus on these here: organized violence and terrorism, financial crimes and fraud, environmental crimes, narcotics trafficking, and human trafficking, and illegal immigration. So some of these, like environmental crime, may seem as if they're primarily non-cyber crimes, but as we'll discuss, these are cyber-enabled crimes, and understanding how to find information on where the crimes are being solicited and how the crimes are being funded are areas that can create opportunities for disruption. So in the area of organized violence and terrorism, some of the bigger areas are kidnapping for ransom. This is often controlled by a syndicate, and we're finding that a lot of these are linked to terrorist organizations. So ISIL, Al-Shabaab, Gaddafi Network. These were actually from a report. I believe during some training that I did in Uganda last year, I was speaking with someone that indicated that Al-Shabaab's not recognized as a terror organization by all countries. So I just put that out there as one of the, it was identified in this report as a terrorist organization. Extortion, so related to groups who engage in kidnapping for ransom. So a lot of these groups are doing both. They may impersonate government officials to facilitate that, and they also may involve private sector individuals, journalists, lawyers, or teachers. Financial crimes, this is the biggest area. A lot of this is cyber dependent, but they can also be cyber enabled. Things like skimmers or creation of physical cards based on breach data. There are a lot of ways that you can facilitate a financial crime. Card present, card not present crimes. If there's a card present, it means that either someone stole a card or they were able to create a duplicate card. These cards can be purchased on the dark web. So again, in terms of facilitation from the dark web, if you go into a dark web marketplace that sells stolen credit card data, you can purchase that data relatively cheaply. Usually on those websites, you can actually test the card to see if it's valid. So they have a system in place, and you test the card, it comes back valid. And a lot of them will even offer refunds if you come back later and say, hey, this card didn't work, I tried to bust it out and I wasn't able to obtain the funds. If you steal this credit card data, you have a couple of different options on how to offload it. So one option is to create duplicate cards. There are also dark web markets that can create those cards, or you can go into a dark web marketplace and purchase a device that will emboss the cards for you. So you can purchase card stock and actually encode the card yourself at home. Card not present may also indicate a data breach. And one way that these cards are offloaded without the trouble of having to create credit cards is also facilitated by cyber, and that's through online marketplaces. So if you have the PIN or a CVV number, which is the small code on the back of the card, you'll be able to use that card online. Studies indicate that there are links between financial crimes in Eastern Africa and Europe. So a lot of transnational crime going in the direction of Europe in this specific area. Counterfeit currency is considered a financial crime, and there are several syndicates in Central and West Africa related specifically to the counterfeit currency issue. Cyber attacks. So the cyber attacks can be financial, and they can also be more disruptive or malicious. The foreign actors may disrupt banking operations with a DDoS attack, which is a distributed denial of service attack. These are generally malicious, although they can also be related to ransoms or extortion. The DDoS attacks can involve computers literally in every country of the world. So when you think of transnational, they're basically using computers that have been infected with malware to do an attack on an institution. So they're using that computer to tie up the network for a bank or other institution. Foreign actors may hack the bank and initiate a series of SWIFT transactions. Going back to Stephen's presentation, this would be a passive attack. They're actually going in to the bank and moving money directly through a breach in the bank's security. Or they can do an active attack, which would be a romance or lottery type scam. This is one that we see in the United States that has often links to Africa. I've seen links to both South Africa, Nigeria, and different parts, not specifically Eastern Africa, during my time working with the Marshal Service. But they generally find a foreign victim and get them to wire money. But the actual scam is either exploiting social media, dating websites, or email phishing schemes. So they may email someone and tell them that they've won money, or they may vet a person and create a friendship or the guise of a friendship and socially engineer a person to convince them to send money. Environmental crimes, so these are crimes that are more cyber enabled. They are, obviously in Africa, this is much more of an issue than the United States. Wildlife tracking and poaching, which some of the larger animals are elephant, rhino, primates, and pangolin. Natural resource crimes, which would be an example of which was illegal timber. There was a big case in Somalia a couple of years ago where they were timbering for charcoal. Perfume is another area, and then also people just illegal timbering locally to build, so they're using it for local consumption. And then pollution crimes, which are related often to mining companies. This is where a foreign entity might come in and run a business and then illegally dump chemicals. Years and years ago, there was a battery company, I won't name their name, that polluted an African country and did a great deal of environmental damage. So these are things that are involve bad actors, but also they can involve corporate enterprise as well. Narcotics trafficking. So this is an example of narcotics hidden in a tire. Cannabis, some of the bigger ones that are in Eastern Africa specifically are cannabis, cocaine, heroin, methamphetamines, khat, synthetic drugs, and counterfeit pharmaceuticals. A lot of them are coming from Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, India, Brazil, Bolivia, and Peru. And a lot of the destinations include South Africa, Europe, the United States, and Asia. So some of the drugs that are coming into Africa are coming as a transit point, and some as a destination point, and some are exported for foreign consumption. Transportation includes ingestion by couriers, hidden compartments, and shipments with legal goods. The ingestion by couriers, a lot of people may be familiar with the idea of taking heroin and putting it in a balloon, and then having, Stephen talked about money mules or mules who help facilitate the movement of drugs or money or other illegal goods. So the way that a mule would move drugs is by ingesting it, or they may have a secret compartment in a suitcase, usually more locally. It may be in a hidden compartment like this tire example. In the United States, sometimes they get very creative. They'll have hidden compartments where if you turn your turn signal on and then your windshield wiper and then honk your horn, they have a circuit set up within the car that will then reveal a hidden compartment behind the dashboard. So maybe through the glove compartment, there's a hidden trap that will open, and then drugs or money will be moved in that compartment. These are generally, if you've got drugs, you've got money. With cyber enabled, a lot of times the money transaction may be done through cryptocurrency outside of the actual drug transaction. But also you have bulk money movement. So if money's being moved, if drugs are being moved in a hidden compartment, a lot of times you will have money moving the other direction in the hidden compartment. So understanding the direction of travel for the different illegal goods helps to understand which direction the money will be going, which is the opposite direction. And a lot of times there's a correlation between the two. And then the other way to ship is hidden within legal goods. So, you know, a lot of belief is that goods that have a strong odor like coffee can conceal the smell of cocaine and throw dogs off if you're using dogs to locate drugs. So, drugs may be shipped with coffee, or here in the United States, we often see it with hidden in a truck full of cabbage or something along those lines. Human trafficking, this is an international issue. It's a very big issue in the United States, as big as anywhere else. A lot of people in the United States are a little bit blind to the realities of human trafficking, but it's a major issue. In the United States, our mindset generally tends to be that human trafficking is a sex crime. And I think the reality, even in the United States, is that it's not just a sex crime. It's, there are many reasons why people traffic in humans. So Eastern Africa is primarily a source or transit area for trafficking. So, meaning that the countries in Eastern Africa are not necessarily the consumption of illegal labor or prostitution, but more that people are kidnapped or stolen from Eastern Africa to be transported other places. And those places include Europe, the Middle East, and Southern Africa as destination areas. Trafficking includes domestic labor, forced labor, and prostitution. One of the issues in Africa with human trafficking is that there is some migration because of conflicts, poverty, and other issues that people move illegally between countries, which makes them more vulnerable to being abducted and forced into labor, prostitution, or other forms of trafficking. Human trafficking is associated with document forgery, fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, smuggling of weapons and drugs. So the crime of human trafficking has a lot of relative crimes that are being conducted alongside of it. If you're abducting someone, you have to prove their identity to move them into another country. You're creating documents. Obviously, the fraud aspect applies to all of these. Money laundering, illegal labor. Obviously, you're not paying taxes if you're not paying the person as well, and smuggling. So a lot of crimes, a lot of these transnational organizations also engage in multiple forms of trafficking or smuggling. So humans, weapons, drugs, or any other illegal activity may happen in concert with each other. And the internet is a major player in the human trafficking, either through sourcing, identifying sources, matching up sellers with buyers, laundering the money, moving money, and to include the cryptocurrency aspect of that. So the cyber-specific crimes would be illegal access, online frauds, card frauds, phishing, cyber stalking. A lot of that has to do with social media. People get heated on social media, but it can also be a form of ransom. Here in the United States, one of the things we found in a few years back was more of an issue, is that people would find people on social media and find out a lot about that person and send them a letter telling them what bus their child rides to school, what their address is, and then telling them that they already have a hitman that's going to take their child out or do some harm to their child, and that they should pay to a certain Bitcoin address, whatever the ransom they're demanding. We want you to send $500 to this Bitcoin address. You have 3 days or your child's going to disappear. That's an example of a cyber-specific crime. The entire thing would be done online through a communication. Now, it may be sent through physical mail, or if the email has been compromised as part of the social media attack, they may have the actual email and do it by email as well. Child pornography, malware. Malware also in the form of ransomware, where a file will be downloaded on a computer, either through a phishing scheme or some other method. You click on a link somewhere on a malicious website, the malware goes on the computer, it encrypts all the files, and then a message comes up that your computer has been compromised, and in order to retrieve your files or get the decryption key to decrypt those files, you need to send Bitcoin to a Bitcoin address. The malware is still the ransomware malware is still a big issue in the United States, and cryptocurrency remains the primary method for people demanding ransoms. Some of the older versions of the ransomware, those keys are readily available, but they're constantly updating these attacks so to make it hard, where if you want those files back before they're destroyed, depending on the value, you may have to pay the ransom. They're pretty good about customer service. There's usually a link on there. If you can't get the cryptocurrency in time, they'll maybe extend you an extra day or two to get the money. So, the criminals at least have a heart, so to speak. I say that jokingly. Computer-enabled terrorism. A lot of this, a lot of recruitment and other types of activity where people are radicalized through social media or web forums, identity theft, which is a major issue, particularly here in the United States. People's identities are compromised, and then credit accounts or banking, the financial fraud is built off the identity theft, unsolicited messages, and violation of intellectual property rights, which would be basically theft of intellectual property, which again is another major issue that we face here in the United States. Cyber criminals target the financial services sector, including mobile money service providers, web and online services, and social media platforms. Social media also can be exploited other ways. There's a suggestion recently that TikTok, which is the social media app for short videos, has been collecting data on users to include potentially facial recognition. There was another app maybe a year or two ago that did age progression. So you download the app, you take a picture, and it'll show, okay, this is what you would look like in 20 years, or you could regress your age, and this is you as a baby. So those type of apps, a lot of times that data is being mined by malicious actors. So just because something's an app or in an app store does not mean that it's valid. It may be used for malicious purposes. And also some of the apps, so Apple is pretty good about scouring all of the data within an app before they allow it in the App Store. And I believe Google Play has gotten better at that, but there's always the risk that if you download an app onto a device, that it's going to contain malware, which can steal your data, put ransomware on your computer, or do a variety of other malicious activities. The dark web role of cryptocurrency. This coin here is called Monero. Monero is one of the current sweethearts of the dark web because it's harder to trace than Bitcoin. It's not impossible to trace. Depending on the amount of money being moved, there's a way to do it. But dark web markets allow criminal enterprises to advertise goods or services. The Silk Road case with Ross Ulbricht that Stephen mentioned at the end of his presentation is a good example of that. It was a marketplace that was built, very similar to eBay. And what you would do is a seller of whatever would go set up an account. So, if I'm selling drugs, I set up a drug market at the Silk Road marketplace, and then a buyer finds me, and we do a transaction. He gives me a certain amount of Bitcoin. I mail him through mail, generally, a package containing cocaine or heroin or whatever he's purchasing. And then he gives me buyer feedback. So he says, oh, this was a 5-star transaction. I received the drugs in 3 days. The customer service was great. The drugs were good quality, or whatever type of feedback would happen. So then the marketplace would allow all these illicit goods and services to be sold. And then through the customer feedback system like eBay, people could kind of value trust on whether this is a trusted seller or not. The currency of choice in the dark web is cryptocurrency. Bitcoin and Monero are two of the more common. Cryptocurrency allows for payments that appear to be anonymized, and cryptocurrency is faster than traditional wires, so it's a quick transaction. I say appear to be anonymized because particularly Bitcoin can be traced. There are companies like CipherTrace, Chainalysis, and Elliptic that provide services that will help a government agency track. So it's not cheap, those services. In terms of capacity building, this is a good area to train experts in, because the money laundering that's going to happen through cyber-enabled crime is going to be increasingly tied to digital currencies. One quick point on the dark web that I wanted to make: the onion router, which is the sort of the core technology for accessing the dark web, was created by the U.S. Navy, or the Navy labs, and the purpose of that was to help obfuscate communications, intelligence communications. So it's one of those little known facts. It's still funded indirectly through DARPA, and the reason why the dark web exists has legitimate reasons, to include allowing dissidents in places like China or North Korea to report abuses. So the The dark web is not entirely an evil place, but it's, I would say, in my opinion, primarily a place where bad things happen. And in terms of doing investigations involving the dark web, I would say that it's important to have expertise in that before engaging in it, because it is an area where there's a lot of bad actors. So some of the key findings related to the Interpol reports: transnational organized crime and violent extremism are increasingly interconnected. So you have criminal and terrorist organizations interlinked to, based purely on the profit motive of crime. Traffickers are progressively diversifying and interconnecting their activities. So this is what I mentioned earlier, that you may see human trafficking and arms trafficking interlinked. Africa is a consumption, production, and transit hubs for various illicit drugs. An estimated 18 tons of cocaine originating from South America and destined for Europe, transiting through West Africa every year. So that's a little bit west of where we're talking about today. While all aspects of human trafficking, including sexual and labor exploitation, occur on the continent, cases of human trafficking victims auctioned in open markets or falling prey to organ removal scams have been detected in some African regions. So a little bit more heinous in my mind. And migrants moving illegally are particularly vulnerable, as I mentioned earlier. Rapid technological development, including e-commerce and mobile technologies, have come with the proliferation of cybercrime. Criminal networks are exploiting the continent's weak IT infrastructure with threats including ransomware, malware, and social media scams. So as the technology catches up, some of this will be easier to mitigate. Where technology has expanded so quickly, it's moved quicker than the ability for organizations and governments to keep up in terms of infrastructure. And that's not alone, it's not something unique to Africa, it's unique everywhere, in not just with the infrastructure, but I would also mention in terms of legal capacity. The United States has addressed cryptocurrency, for instance, with a variety of laws that sort of regulate it. In places in Africa, I did a cryptocurrency training last week for Ghana. In Ghana, cryptocurrency is not illegal. In fact, the Central Bank of Ghana is exploring a central digital currency. But like in a place like Malawi, it's considered illegal. So there are different laws or an absence of laws. And those are areas that hopefully the legislation will catch up. Even in the United States, we're not caught up even on the legal front. To include areas like biometrics, there is no overarching biometric legislation in the United States. So as technology moves more quickly than our legislative bodies, it's an area that's always going to lag behind. So some of the challenges to combating transnational crime: it's lucrative, $1.6 trillion in profits in 2015. Organized crime and violent extremists leverage illegal networks and public corruption, as mentioned. And this is not just unique to Africa either. Even here in the United States, I worked a case several years ago where I arrested a police officer who was on duty using his police car to travel with drug shipments to protect them from being stopped by other law enforcement. The rapid pace of globalization combined with internet and dark markets and cryptocurrency create easy access to international networks. So these networks are easy to link into, and you can facilitate either side of the transaction, either as a seller or a buyer, and link in with an international network to complete an illegal trade. Economics is conducive to illegal trade, so that where less economic opportunity is available, it creates a greater willingness to engage in illegal trade as a means of creating wealth. IT infrastructure, trying to keep pace with new technology, and again, this is an area that affects everybody transnationally. So some of the solutions are interagency cooperation and a whole government coordination, and this includes the idea of the fusion center. So fusion centers take the private sector, public sector, NGOs, all of the stakeholders, which is part of the reason why I talk about some of the cyber-enabled crimes, because when you start looking at disruption, you look at what are the routes, where are the destinations, where are the sources, so that you can create disruption in those supply chains, and also understand what those supply and demand needs are. So when you have banks and other private enterprise cooperating and sharing data with government, there is a greater opportunity. And then trans-government, when you have organizations like Interpol and Afripol coordinating investigations, capacity building, it's easier to create the disruption that's needed to mitigate some of the transnational crime. Mapping of transnational networks and leveraging of local knowledge. The local knowledge is very important. I don't have a great deal of insight into the issues in Africa other than through reading, but sometimes there's differences. So in the United States, we may have traps in cars. In Africa, they may be, there may be some other method for doing that. So understanding the local behavior helps create that disruption. Application of new and emerging technologies. This is probably one of the most important areas to fight cybercrime. Cyber is a great tool. So understanding how to track cryptocurrency, understanding how to create honeypots in the dark web, or understand what's going on in the dark web so you can see the trends that are happening and mitigate on the correlation of those trends. So if you know there's an increase in credit card fraud, addressing it from that perspective. Sound analytical capabilities that can inform national security responses. And again, this may include the military, law enforcement, government, legislation, lawyers, across the board, integrating those capabilities and using information or data across the board creates better analytical capabilities. And strong national cross-border legal architectures that preserve individual liberties. So looking at this from a perspective that create an architecture that include data sharing while preserving liberties. So you don't want to share information in a way that jeopardizes liberty, but it can be done, again, through technology. An example of that might be using zero knowledge proof. So you could create identity tokens that are that do not contain any PII, but maybe contain other data that can be used to match. And then when those matches are made, the two individuals can deconflict, or the two entities can deconflict. So if there's data that matches between a bank and a government, and they're saying some sort of activity through a zero knowledge proof alert, those two entities will be alerted to each other's investigation or knowledge, and then they can collaborate together offline to figure out what it is that they're looking at analytically. So that's the conclusion of my presentation. I guess it's time for the question and answers.
Hannington, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, David, you're currently on mute.
I think I have corrected that, sorry. I wanted to thank John first, before we go to the questions, for the very good presentation. I think I've personally learned that there are so many transnational crimes. In my research, there are some I had not unearthed, but I have seen so many, and in a very clear manner. Now, I will go to the questions that we received before the session, and then I will open up the platform to questions from members present. So the first question is, do lawyers, and this, I think this goes to both John and Steve, do lawyers require a separate set of skills to handle transnational crimes, especially those related to cyber-related ones? Skills that are separate from the traditional defense prosecution kind of skills? Do you need special training? So that is one of the questions we received. Then there was a question on how does transnational crime differ from usual crime? That might be easy, but there are some things that might be more complicated. This question goes on to ask, besides transcending borders, are there other attributes to these crimes that make them unique? And then what is the difference between the crimes, TOC, transnational organized crime, and international crime? I think those are the questions I got for now. I will open up the session to more questions. I think more are coming on. We can get the answers to the few that have been raised as we listen to more. I'll put them across once we get the responses for these ones. So welcome, Steve and John.
I'm happy for John to go first. Obviously, he has a wealth of experience, and thank you for the excellent presentation, John. I certainly have learned a lot. So I'll why don't you go first, and then I'll see what's left for me to answer, if anything.
Sure. Yes. So I'm sure actually Stephen has a better grip on the on some of these questions, but I want to address the special skills for the lawyer. Even though Stephen's the lawyer, I wanted to give an anecdote. So I'm not a lawyer, but one of the cases that I worked that involved cryptocurrency, we tracked an individual to Honduras, and we were able to extradite him back. So he was selling drugs in the dark web, which was facilitated with cryptocurrency. So it was a transnational crime on a couple of different levels. When we finally got him extradited back to the United States, and it was time to prosecute him, one of the issues was how do we seize the cryptocurrency, which is kind of a lawyer question. So what happens if you have a suspect who's facilitating his crime through cryptocurrency and he doesn't want to share the private key? And we didn't talk too much about cryptocurrency today, but there's two ways that two keys that are required for cryptocurrency. One's the public key, which is the wallet address or like the bank account number that exists on a public ledger. And then the other piece is a private key, which would be like your PIN number that allows you to move that funding. Without the private key, it's not possible for the government to be able to seize that money. So one of the things that that the lawyer that I was working with on this case came up with was a money judgment. So I'm not sure if there's an equivalent in Africa, but it's something to consider if there's not an equivalent. The money judgment allowed us to seize the amount of money that was in that wallet by making him liable for that full amount through a money judgment. And then if he wouldn't give us the key, it would allow us to seize other assets of his in the like amount, in the like value. So I'll leave it at that question to begin with.
Well, thank you. Steve, do you have anything to add?
So I certainly think that as far as what additional set of skills are concerned for in order to deal with the cyber-related aspects of technology, I would say that I think what is key is an ability to learn, a willingness to go beyond your comfort zone. I quite accidentally got into technology law practice because in my early days in university, I ended up studying computer programming, information systems, just because I thought, hey, the fun thing to do while I'm studying law. When I later went for a postgraduate degree in technology and telecoms, I realized how relevant that knowledge I had was. I did end up working for the regulatory agency of telecoms in the country. I've worked for a telecommunication service provider after that, and did quite a number of consultancies in the area of technology and telecoms. And I realized that the knowledge I had was quite helpful. And I've since tried to always keep myself current with technology and technical information. That has been really important in order to add value to the technology clients I represent, but also for the cases that I handle in court. I think one of the things I really enjoy is breaking down technology cases to a lay judge. And the beauty about it is, watching the penny drop, watching them understand the ecosystem in order for them to understand the case, the tree in the forest. So I think what I'm saying here is I've been lucky in what I have had as experience, but certainly a willingness to grapple with technology has made it very helpful. So it's important to have that willingness to learn. I think attending the relevant trainings are not necessarily just pure lawyer trainings. A few hardcore trainings would help stretch the knowledge of lawyers. Now, if you're a prosecutor, it's absolutely important to have this training. And I know that AGA Africa has provided quite a bit of training opportunities for prosecutors, some of which I've been involved in. I've had the opportunity to be on the defense for a technology client in the country, and we had prosecutors. And whereas there's some very good forensic investigators in the enforcement agencies, I think with some of the people I've dealt with in the past, there was a gap. There was a gap in knowledge and understanding, which makes it that much more difficult if I was a prosecutor to prosecute. And it makes it easier, well, somewhat easier for the defense lawyer to run rings around the prosecution. So I think as lawyers, it behoves us to come to grips with technology in a way that goes beyond your desktop understanding. How does transnational crime differ from legal crime? I think that, I mentioned that, and I think it was also handled quite robustly by John. But really, it involves, planning, implementation, or effect of what would otherwise be a traditional crime across different jurisdictions. It might also not just be a traditional crime, but would be a cyber crime as traditionally defined. And so, there's the ability of that crime to spread across different jurisdictions, and different parts of it in terms of the implementation can be tracked in different countries. Which would lead me to the other question that was asked, which is to say the distinction between international crimes and transnational crimes. International crimes would be defined primarily as crimes against humanity, so that you're talking about war crimes, you're talking about crimes against individuals, which could be in a particular country. It could be crimes spreading across different countries. But drug trafficking, in some ways, is also a crime against humanity because of what it does to the different communities where it's involved. But drug crimes at the same time are transnational crimes. But the strict definition of an international crime are those, are what you call those offenses against humanity. So, things like violations of human rights in different countries, etc. That's all.
Thank you very much, Steve and John. I think the questions have been answered really well. Now, there's something that also arose on the issue of extradition. If a person commits a crime in Kenya, and Kenya does not have extradition laws, and this crime was committed elsewhere, and there's that requirement that he be extradited or he be charged in that other country, what happens then?
I'm going to refer to Stephen on Kenyan law. I can briefly touch on it with the U.S. law, and in the United States, we have to have mutual treaties or extradition treaties with every country. So it's going to depend on the treaty, and it's going to depend on the crime. So if the crime is not a crime in the country that the person went to, and is a crime in the United States, we may not be able to extradite. And there may not be even an opportunity to have them prosecuted in that country. So it really depends as far as the U.S. is concerned. But this was a Kenya question, so I'll get the expert on that.
Well, I think it was a more or less hypothetical question, because in Kenya we do have a Mutual Legal Assistance Act. However, and the Legal Assistance Act then allows you to engage and collaborate with regard to apprehension and perhaps the to use it in a loose sense, the rendition of the criminal, or the extradition of the criminal to an acceptable jurisdiction to face crime. Now, it would be easy to answer the question if, say, this was a crime in country A, it's not a crime in country B, mutual legal assistance treaty or act, and therefore the person who's been apprehended in country B is sent to country A. But if it's a crime in country B or in multiple jurisdictions, I mean, in the case where an individual is sitting in country A and commits a crime of hacking into bank accounts in country B, and the proceeds of the crime are then sent to country C, D, and E, so that there is an ability to fasten the commission of the crime or the offense in more than one jurisdiction, including possibly in the domicile of the individual, even though the crime didn't happen there. So obviously what needs to be agreed on, if there's mutual legal assistance, is where to prosecute. But if there's no mutual legal assistance, then you can't do anything. You can't get the criminal to your country. What I've seen in a number of cases is a lot of countries are very reluctant to send their citizens to other countries to face the law. What they will tend to do is prosecute them, and often defense counsel will insist and use the defense that the individual, the criminal, is prosecuted in their home jurisdiction, but the crime must find a home in the statute, in the penal code of that country. Otherwise, then it's an empty defense, and that way then the other countries would have to agree, even though they don't have much of a choice. You will recall, if you're a Kenyan, that we've had a former Cabinet Secretary of Finance and a former Kenya Power and Lighting Company CEO who went through extradition proceedings for about 2-3 years for purposes of offenses committed in the island of Jersey in the United Kingdom. And ultimately, the court did find that they could be extradited. I do not know if they have been extradited. But if there is no extradition treaty, then you have to rely on the countries who have offenses, who can spell out that offense in their statute books, but primarily where the individual is found, and whether they can be moved to a second or a third country for prosecution. But typically, even criminals prefer to be prosecuted in their own countries, because I guess worst case scenario is, even if you're convicted, you are convicted in your home country. It's a country you understand, you have family who can visit you, etc. Perhaps that's a motivation. I'm not sure I've completely answered your question, but please revert back if sufficient.
Well, I think that is sufficient and quite satisfactory. I have received 2 more questions. I know we have just 10 minutes, but let me ask the 2 before we finally close. Recently, there was a lady who went viral in Kenya because somehow criminals got into her account. They took, I think, all her money or part of her money, and the bank somehow has been unable to help. So I don't know what kind of legal recourse is available to her. I'm hoping this is not a matter that is already in a court, before a court of law or anything. But I'm wondering what kind of legal recourse is there if some fraudsters or some criminals get into your money through your account, steal the whole sum, and then your bank is unable to handle the crime. What kind of remedy do you have? Then there's a final question from I think someone called Gatambia Dongo. He wants to know how internet governance may be used or may be bolstered to prevent internet crimes. I don't know that I asked that correctly, but that is the gist of his questions. How can internet governance be used to bolster or prevent commission of crimes over the internet?
Oh, all right. Well, I'll address the second question briefly, and the first question is outside of my area of knowledge. But in terms of governance, I think a couple of the things that need to be addressed are issues like cryptocurrency, because that's the primary way money's going to be moving. So having regulations in the United States, we have a money service business law that applies to cryptocurrency exchanges. So if you're transferring fiat into cryptocurrency or vice versa, you have to be registered as a money service business. In most cases, you also have to have a license in each state within the United States. So there's a regulatory framework around that has a full KYC, AML compliance aspect to it because of that regulation. So it's the same data that a bank would be collecting on a customer. So that helps if you're able to track a cryptocurrency transaction. At some point, that transaction is going to have to be converted to fiat currency. So if I'm selling something illegal in the dark web and someone pays me in Bitcoin, at some point I'm going to transfer that into fiat. When that happens, it's going to go through a money service business if it happens in the United States, and that money service business is going to know who the person is. So I have attribution, identity. So identity attribution, any type of governance within cyber that can help get to identity is an area that where legislation would definitely benefit in transnational cybercrime.
Thank you, John. Steve, welcome.
Right. The very interesting questions. I actually quite like the questions. Simply because, number one, the first question, someone's account was hacked and the bank apparently is unable to do anything. I had a case which was similar to this, where there was a crime committed, and this is very typical of Nigeria, and there's a certain name they give those kind of scams. But a certain group of Nigerians hacked a certain lady's account, bank account in Kenya. She was resident outside the country. And used mobile internet banking to access her funds. And so when it was hacked and all her funds were cleared out, she came to the bank and accused them of carelessness, negligence, etc. So the bank asked us to defend them because she decided to file a legal suit. Now, part of the tragedy of the case is we didn't end up going to a full trial, and this is because we strongly recommended to the bank settlement. Why? Because when we got the services of a cyber expert who we intended to use as an expert witness, we got to understand that the bank had certain gaps in their cybersecurity. There were certain elements that suggested negligence, and that would have been fatal to their case, regardless of how strong a defense we mounted. And what the lady was asking for was a refund of her money. But interest if the case went to trial. So we did impress upon the bank, and eventually they agreed with us. And the point here is to say that the Nigerians who hacked into our account went through all the security procedures, including those with a robot. Basically, there was the other end of the line which was asking the security questions, and somehow they had all the answers. And eventually, when they were given access to the account, within an hour, all her 3 accounts had been cleared. We didn't understand how that happens, because those are supposed to be some of the mitigating measures to forestall such happenings. What really I would suggest is that depending on the nature of the facts of the case, the bank liable clearly. There's a relationship there. And if you can show there was no negligence on your part as an individual, because if you received a phishing email and you responded, let's assume it was the Bank of Outer Mongolia, and you get an email from the Bank of Outer Mongolia saying, we are refreshing our security systems. Mr. Kiptines, can you kindly confirm your email and your password? And I write back without asking. And I've received several of those emails purporting to be from certain banks I have accounts with. Anytime I get that, I do make a phone call to the bank and I ask, did you send this email? And banks will never send you emails asking for passwords on open email. So if an individual writes back giving their email or their security passwords, then the bank is absolved of negligence because you yourself were careless. So depending on the facts of the case, you did everything by the book and you did not compromise your own security, you probably the lady probably has a case against the bank, but it's dependent on the facts of the case. Now, the question that was asked and answered, I guess, quite well by John. The only thing I'll add is that there's a body called ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, which is operated through a multi-stakeholder arrangement. Now, in that sense, they have a series of advisory committees that advise them on security on the internet. The job of ICANN is to ensure, I like to say, availability, stability, and security of the internet. Now, one of those advisory committees is known as the Security Stability Advisory Committee. That committee works very closely with the United Nations, and the United Nations has certain guidelines related to security. ICANN works closely with several multilateral agencies and international agencies, just trying to make sure that the internet is secure. The internet, if we could keep criminals off the net, it would be excellent. That's impossible. But because ICANN is responsible at a primary level, and this extends to the different what are called regional registries, including the country code registries who assign domain names for their local jurisdiction. There must be security at the center of how the internet is run and operated. And I think the ICANN is doing quite a lot to try and ensure security, but it flows down the chain that everybody who works in that space, including registries and us as individuals, need to make sure that our security remains at a premium. Thank you.
Thank you once again, John and Steve. There's one last question. I think you can see it. It's on the question and answers area. It says, what is the legal status of the case of the Akasha brothers who are practically kidnapped by US personnel on Kenyan soil amidst ongoing extradition proceedings in Kenya?
I missed the first part of that question, but I'm not familiar with the case, but I missed the first part of the question.
You can see it on the Q&A. Please check Q&A. Meanwhile, Steve, if you can respond.
Okay, let me respond while John is looking at it. I guess he wasn't involved in the case. This is a very interesting case because the Akasha brothers, and a little of a background here for John, the Akasha brothers were from a crime family, or rather a drug trafficking family. Their father and uncle and father and his brothers were quite big in the drug trafficking space, and their dad was shot to death in Netherlands, in Amsterdam, in fact. Something went wrong in their criminal enterprise, and the sons took over. And what happened is the sons basically had control of quite a huge chunk of the local Kenya police, the local judiciary officials, and certain functionaries within the government of Kenya. So that over the period of, maybe 5 to 10 years, or maybe 7 years, they were never able to be successfully prosecuted for drug trafficking, regardless of the availability, as I understand it, of evidence. And so because the Kenya government works with several other nations and agencies, the FBI had obviously provided in their view, very strong and cogent evidence of how the Akasha brothers were using Kenya as a conduit for drugs. And you recall our president lighting up a ship somewhere on the high seas, which had been caught with drugs in its hold. And this was attributed to the Akasha brothers. So the FBI reported that they gave very strong evidence that should have led to a conviction. It did not. And it was later discovered after these individuals were renditioned, and I like that word quite a bit. It simply means being picked up from where you are, perhaps without regard to due process, and taken to a specific jurisdiction where you can face trial, and that's what happened to them. And I don't blame whoever renditioned the brothers, because they had been in Kenya scot-free for several years with apparently or allegedly evidence that could have put them behind bars. But within a year of them being taken to face trial in Maryland, they were convicted, they were sentenced, and at that point they started pleading that they be allowed to be extradited back to Kenya to serve their sentences. And obviously that wasn't going to happen because they had been in Kenya walking scot-free despite the evidence that was available. So what I'm saying here is, look, I don't have a view on the illegality of the rendition. Obviously, as a lawyer, I cannot support any illegality. But as a citizen of this country, I would say that they got their comeuppance. They certainly got the justice that needed to be served on them. Unfortunately, not in the country. And there are certain individuals who are put on a watch list of the FBI and later on, I think, by the US Embassy. Certain judges, certain policemen, certain, I believe, executive officials of this country who are allegedly complicit in ensuring these individuals did not come to justice. So what can I say?
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you very much. John, if you have anything you can add.
No, I actually, while I was listening to Stephen, very interesting case, and I actually was trying to also read a little bit while listening, and it sounds like, you know, I picked up on the part about the rendition, you know, and I know what a formal policy of a government isn't always necessarily the policy that transpires, but it's a very interesting case, and I'm not sure what the legal aspect, you know, when you're dealing with transnational crime, as Stephen mentioned earlier, the prosecution can happen in any jurisdiction that is affected by the crime. So if you can prove the nexus, then you have the ability for the prosecution, which appears was the case with the U.S. But it sounds like the issue here is not so much the underlying offense as much as the process. So it's very interesting, and it'd be interesting to see if that ends up in the international courts, which there's I guess there's the possibility that. Very interesting, though. I learned something very, and now I'm going to have to read up on it later because it piqued my interest.
Well, thank you so much, John. I think the case is very interesting. Members or participants in the session asking for these notes, I believe we will share with you once the session is complete. So once we finish this, we will share with you the presentations. I hope that is okay with you, John and Steve.
Absolutely, very well.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I was deputizing for Huntington, who had another prior engagement planned. He's been unable to come back. I thought he'd make it back before we end the session, but it looks like he's still caught up elsewhere. So I would like to thank you all for attending, taking time off your very busy schedules to attend this very important training session. We will be holding follow-up sessions. If you have questions related to transnational crimes, transnational organized crime, you can share with us and the AGA Team Africa. We will escalate the same to our panelists and other experts within our reach. Then your question will be responded to. For those from, I know we have representatives from state prosecution. We have representatives from banks that I think in the African continent have been most affected by organized crime, especially with the rise of the internet. You can bring in your questions. We will try as much as possible to have them answered, even offline. Thank you to our presenters. Thank you, John, for taking time to join us. Thank you, Steve. I know you've been with us from the very first session. We really appreciate you sharing with us your knowledge and experience in this area. So this brings us to the end of this particular session. We look forward to having further engagements. I know EALS and the Institute has organized a further training on digital forensics. I think the first session comes on Thursday. So if you will be available, join us on there. I think there was so much interest on digital forensics that we decided to do a follow-up training. It comes up on Thursday, this Thursday. We are doing this in collaboration with the Nairobi branch of the Law Society of Kenya. So thank you very much to the speakers. If there's anything you'd like to say as a closing remark, this is the opportunity.
I'd just like to thank the AGA Africa for sponsoring this training and all the attendees. It's very important that we share our knowledge. You know, I learned stuff as well, and you know, to interdict or mitigate some of the transnational issues requires capacity building, training, and cooperation. So this is part of that broader picture that we talked about today. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think my closing remarks are really, again, of course, to thank AGA and thank the East African Law Society. An opportunity to present is also an opportunity to learn, not just from the other speakers, such as, you know, John has given a very excellent presentation, but also from yourself. You know, the more research you do, the more material you're able to get, the more you learn. I will ask the attendees to strive to learn. Don't get intimidated by technology. I find that quite common with a lot of lawyers, and it's not because, you know, we don't like technology, and in certain cases we don't like technology. I mean, but look at what COVID has done to us. You know, we're having to litigate cases. We're having to, you know, engage with our clients solely through virtual means. So, you know, use this as an opportunity to go beyond your comfort zone, trying to understand what technology is about. And I'm sure you, in your 6-degree circle, would have a friend or relative who's in the space of computer science or in technology who can help break down certain technical things. There's books available. There's books on technology, law, that are available. And as the more you interact with them, especially for our prosecutors, we do not want the gap to be in prosecution, which would allow criminals to get off scot-free. In as much as, you know, some of us may appear as defense counsel, I think we want to see the right thing being done. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Steve and John. I think we have come to the end of this session. Participants are free to leave, and I will share the presentations personally.
It was good to meet you, John. Have a good day. Cheers.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you as well. And I will also provide my email address. You can share that as well as the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, John.